Well, I moved to 103rd Street to try to save a building that had a fire that was going to be abandoned. It was one of the very first tenant-run kind of sweat equity buildings, and the top 2 floors burned off. So the building was going to be abandoned, basically, and then Hope came along and wanted to sort of revitalize that whole block, the whole neighborhood.
I became involved in Hope Community in 1973. I was living on 99th Street, and I was going to Hunter College to get a degree in urban planning. And I wanted to do something in the community, and I started walking around, and I ended up on 104th Street, and I met George Rodriguez, and I met George Calvert, and so I actually started doing some internship with them, and then I'm still involved.
I'm not quite sure how I got involved in the neighborhood, but I did, and over time I came to really respond to the sense of community that I found here. And through that I came to know the people, some of the people at Hope Community. And my first experience of Hope was its sense of community. I realized that much of the sense of community I felt here was due to Hope and its work.
Every morning when I went in, there was a bodega on the ground floor, owned by this woman, Haiti, who was a board member of Hope Community, and I would go down there, you know, buy coffee in the morning, and she was the one that recruited me. She was on the board of Hope, and she told me, you know, I said, Hope, it's a community organization that does low-income housing for the community. I said, well, that sounds something great I'd like to do. I want to get back to a Barrio. Through them, I bought my apartment on 97th Street. I was living on West 49th Street at the time. But I always, like I said, I was always drawn back. Algo me llamaba, vente pa acá, no te vayas muy lejos.
Coming in as the newbie, I could see that people like Bill and Ann and Rubye, who'd been on there for so long, they just knew each other, and they knew they had this shared history. And looking at all these photographs, I realized how far back it goes, and I wish I'd been part of it much earlier.
I met George Calvert. He was teaching in IS 117, and we were part of the health and economic development component of MEND at the time.
I think George, the only thing you can say about George is he was just full of energy, and he just had all sorts of ideas. You could barely contain them. He was one of those people who knew that you had to have, you know, lots of ideas in order to have a few of them come to fruition.
Well, I know there was a lot of things about East Harlem, but which I thought could be changed.
Give us an example of things that you thought could be changed.
Well, at the time, a lifestyle of living could be changed because of the housing was going down. And we had a lot of tenements that was not taken care of, and we focused on that.
My understanding of it was that the housing stock in East Harlem was in the neighborhood of 80 to 100 years old. Most of it was abandoned, it was falling, it was decayed. And at that time, this is my version of what I've known, a group of concerned citizens from the neighborhood on 104th Street, led by George Calvert, who was a minister, and among them Morris Wittenberg was one of them, and some other names, I forget. They got together, they pooled their resources, their money. They were working, George was a minister, he was working out of the Church of the Living Hope, which is still there on 104th Street. And they pooled their resources. I think they got something in the neighborhood of 10 grand. They chose the worst building on the block, which is abandoned. I think it was 163. They applied for a grant. They got a grant. They rehabbed that building, and that was the birth of Hope.
Why begin with 103rd Street?
Well, it was one block away from Hope's beginnings, and it was one of the worst blocks, and it had really gotten terrible. Probably 3/4 of the buildings were abandoned. The subway stop there created a lot of traffic, so it was really a focal point to the community.
We are there, they are there, and that's what Calvert George Calvert, you know, he, very wise man. He says it starts with the people. If you get the people together, they can do anything. They can overcome anything. Take 104th Street, the whole block was gutted, burned out, one building. He just was able to get the people to work together, to work on one building, and then the next, and the next. So you have 6 buildings there. That's how Hope Community started, with the help, people helping each other.
We want to thank you all for joining us to celebrate the beginning of rehabilitation of the Scooter buildings. First, a little about the project. The Scooter comprises 5 buildings, 153, 155, and the street here, 163 East 104th Street. 2 buildings north of here, one on Madison Avenue, the other one on 109th Street. In these 5 buildings, there are a total of 63 apartments and 2 ground floor commercial spaces. We're here to celebrate the start of these 5 buildings. Over the past few years, we've renovated 10 buildings.
I would like the legacy of Hope to be is that it is committed to its mission, that it is responsible for the money and the grants and the loans and the tenants' money, and that they maintain the buildings so that that goes on, and that it is not something that's fleeting, and at the end of 15 years they go to market rate and people get pushed out, that Hope Community is here and will be.
Well, I hope, of course, the legacy of Hope would be to continue doing what it does so well and to expand. It's much more difficult now than in the early days. That I've come to understand, that in the 60s and 70s, the abandoned buildings were all over the place, and it was relatively easy to acquire a property from the city. Now, of course, outside developers have essentially bought up all of the remaining buildings, and so that Hope has to change with the times and actually begin to build new ones, not just renovate existing stock.
I really hope Hope can go on through history as Hope Community, as the idea and the picture or persuasion that was painted from the beginning. It was painted to help people realize that we can always do better, and meanwhile bring the others along.
Hope has done a tremendous contribution in its own way. They provided, you know, over the last count, I think we had 1,500 units of housing, you know. We did it. It's a small notch, but you know, like I think it was Ho Chi Minh said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with 1 step.
Hope has a pretty good track record and has its ups and downs over the years, but overall, I think we've built a solid core of good housing and hope to keep building it.